thing should just take a second. Okay, so we're live now then, and I'm here talking with Peter Boghossian as he walks around the block on his quarantine.
Yes, I'm walking around the block because I'm getting fat, because we just mentioned briefly, I'm not doing jujitsu, I'm not going to the gym, I'm not really getting any cardio, but I am getting rather detailed tours of my own neighborhood.
I guess were you just literally just before this on a podcast episode with Curiosity? Yeah, I saw.
I was, and I'm trying to get. This is really good. I'm telling everybody my new plan now is to help people get started with their podcasts and talk to people who have a few podcasts under their belt while I walk around the neighborhood. So it's
right, okay,
kind of a win-win for everybody. So I can walk and talk and try to hit. My new goal is to hit 20,000 steps a day. Since I have a little home gym I've constructed with bottles of bleach and dishwashing or soaps.
All the toilet rolls
and stuff. Yeah, right. So I've been missing jujitsu tremendously. So I'm hoping that this is gonna wind down and then I can get back to training.
Yeah, I mean, I have no idea how long it'll go on for, because there's kind of conflicted opinions on, like how many people have had it or how healthcare services are going to, some people saying it could be like 1 or 2 years. Some people saying, well, probably half, someone in Oxford, I think, was saying maybe half the UK's had it already. And so we could have herd immunity. So it's very weird. And whether there's even going to be, whether the economy is going to be stable enough to worry about things like gym memberships and stuff is another.
Yeah, that's the other thing. I'm on an unpaid leave of absence right now, so I have no money coming in. My wife, not to be overly personal in this conversation, but my wife moved out of the house because she's a healthcare provider and her patients are very at-risk, vulnerable population. So that's another expense I'm now carrying.
Yeah,
because she couldn't come back into the house for a number of reasons. One of chief among those is that I have Crohn's disease, so I'm immunocompromised. So yeah, it's a very, very difficult situation for everybody. There are no winners, with the exception of my dogs. There are no winners in any of this.
Oh yeah, I've seen a few of your videos. Have you got one of your dogs sick or something at the minute as well?
Yeah, well, I have. We got her out. We adopted her as a puppy, and literally the day after I adopted her, we took her to the emergency room, puppy emergency room, dog emergency room, and she had to go to the ICU. It's cost us $1,000 a day, and so we had 6-7 days there, and for a new puppy. But she's a beautiful creature. I love her to death, and now I have three dogs. My daughter's doing a great job with her. She's teaching her how to, because she's basically being homeschooled now. So we're working, firing guns a lot, and we're training the dog, and we're making meals together, and we're watching a little science fiction together. So, and my son played Dungeons and Dragons with me last night. He is just not happy about being home whatsoever. He had his own life, and then he's back in the home, so he's not happy.
Yeah, that's kind of understandable, I guess, and it's just going to be difficult because of all that disruption to education, exams, socializing, and everything. It's kind of nuts, really.
And I can't remember. Someone said to me that he was in a big hurricane, the worst hurricane ever, evidently, according to him, and everybody was totally cool because they knew at the end of the day things would resume.
Right.
But we don't know that at any level. So there's a lot of uncertainty, and, we're 4 people, excuse me, or now that my wife left in the house, we have a friend who lives with us during this crisis. So, how do you have those conversations with those people, and how do you do your best to not annoy people and not be annoyed by people? And I'm talking, we're like 2 weeks in. Imagine you're 6 months.
Yeah. And I think it's something I found as well is just how all kind of routine and structure and everything, it just dissolves into mush, and like you don't know
Right.
when you're awake or sleeping or eating or doing work. Everything just blurs into one after after
Yeah,
2
and
weeks.
no, you're right. I try to control that. I told my daughter she has to stop cooking pies. She's did this fundraiser, and we have all these fucking pies in the refrigerator, and I've been chowing on these pies. She cooks the pies, and God, they're just like crack. I'm telling you, they're so good. But I have to. My wife said to me, over a video message, she's like, "Look, you need to chill on the pies." So I'm trying to solve that by walking around a lot.
Yeah, I've just been eating
Not,
takeout and
yeah.
stuff as well, and it's not good.
I
Have you?
was thinking it would be really good if you had one person who lived with you who was like a black belt and gi and no gi, and you
Right.
just trained and you just stayed in your house and you just trained for like 5 hours a day, slow rolling. Like, how awesome would that be?
I've seen a few people kind of trying to get their wives into jiu-jitsu and stuff, and putting things up on Instagram of them rolling with people who haven't trained
My
before.
God, that would lead to a divorce if I ever tried that. I tried to corral my wife into watching bad sci-fi, and that lasted about 15 minutes. But jujitsu, I don't even think it would last, and she would entertain the thought. But I've tried with my daughter; she's not into it. Tried
Right.
with my son. So, but there are evidently motions that you can do. My coach Matt Thornton, the SBG founder, was telling me there are motions that you can do with jujitsu that obviously are not as good as aliveness training or training with someone, but they're better than not. Anyway, that's what's going on with me. What would you like to talk about today? It's your show.
Yeah, no problem at all. So I thought we would talk about some of your work around having better conversations.
Cool.
And I don't know if you're the first person to come up with the term street epistemology as well. Was that?
Yes,
No.
that was me.
So I was wondering what was kind of behind what's behind this, trying to promote better conversations on difficult topics, things like street epistemology, your most recent book as well, literally titled "How to Have Impossible Conversations."
Right.
What's the motivation behind this kind of work?
So before I answer that question, I'll speak to street epistemology, the term that you asked. So
Yeah,
I
sure.
came up with that because epistemology is such a formal, stuffy academic term, but it doesn't really do anybody any good if it stays in the academy, right? It has to be in the streets. So street epistemology is taking those ideas of how people know what they know and translating that into a lived, everyday, practical, on the street context. So that's that. So the impetus was to help people develop and help yourself too. It's also a selfish thing to help people and yourself develop methods of knowing that can be relied upon, and to do so in a civil way, because the more one strays from civility, the more likely it is that you're going to invoke a defensive posture, and then belief revision will be less possible.
Hmm. So then, would you branch the more recent work you're doing as part of this street epistemology project as well, or is it just a general project in trying to promote better discourse surrounding topics?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's definitely rooted in street epistemology. There's no question about it, but it takes it from issues of faith, religion, God, etc., and it translates that into a broader context of any conversation across a seemingly intractable or a gulf that you just can't. Incommensurable is the word.
Right.
A seemingly incommensurable problem. Like, how do you have conversations with somebody who, on the book I give scales, someone is a 10 on the scale. How do you have a conversation with that person, or how do you speak in a way that is civil to somebody, and you can maintain friendships throughout those just bitter disagreements?
So I was just having a look then. The copy I've got of A Manual for Creating Atheists, was published in 2013. And then your most recent book in 2019. So the project's actually been going for quite a while now. Is it much older than that you actually got started thinking about this type of thing and trying to promote it in your students or in people, like through the media? Or
Yeah, I've been thinking about this stuff since I was a kid, actually. And I've been thinking about ways of reasoning, teaching thinking, teaching reasoning. And then I did it in the prisons with prison inmates at a local facility here. So my dissertation was on that, Columbia River Correctional Institute. I actually did that, I've been thinking about that from my undergraduate, my graduate. And then I've been having these conversations both in class and out of class. And it just seemed to me that nobody had codified it. Like up to a manual for creating atheists, to my astonishment, there were untold numbers of people and materials about how to convert people into a faith, but never one about how to deconvert anyone. I mean, there were cult exiting manuals, but never one about specifically kind of what do you do if someone holds their religious beliefs with a very high degree of confidence? How do you engage them on that? Make them doubt, specifically give them the gift of doubt.
I think one of the things that is really interesting is you see these kind of YouTube channels popping up of people doing street epistemology all over the place, and you see a lot of the time people on the more kind of extreme religious side who normally wouldn't be engaging in discourse, or if they would, it'd be kind of a rigid scripted conversation. How do you presuppose the rules of logic without a God, and coming around in circles? But I think with the street epistemology, you see people kind of opening up and being forced to think about things. It takes people sometimes off the track a bit because it's not combative in that same way.
Yeah, and just to pick up on something you said, I have tried to understand that for a long time. I've never been able to understand the presuppositionalist argument. I don't know, like, let's say that you lived in a universe without God. Why would those, I mean, what would be different about it?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I guess that they're saying, so there are some sophisticated ones out there who have like philosophy master's degrees. So they'd say, like it's the transcendental categories or whatever.
Okay, that's just people using big words to obfuscate when their ontology is full of beans.
But often it's the ones who I see go with it are the less kind of philosophically inclined, and they just shout kind of law of excluded middle, either is the case or it isn't the case, logic, you've got to and I think, have you ever seen a guy called Alex Malpass on YouTube at all?
No, but I've heard the name, and a couple months ago I had dinner with James White. Oh, okay. So, but we didn't talk about God or anything.
Alex Malpass is like an atheist philosopher, but he did a really cool interview with a presuppositionalist called Matt Slick, and he was just kind of unpacking the reasoning there, because he's like a really technical kind of logician. And so when Matt Slick's normally saying to the people he's talking to these kind of things, he was saying, well, aren't you having to infer from this thing to this thing, and it's quite funny to watch actually, because he's just got no idea about the sort of presuppositional philosophy that he's pushing on everyone else.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's why I think that those arguments for the existence of God and the presuppositions, all that stuff is just window dressing. It's just that people are looking for ad hoc explanations, like they're post factum, like after the fact, like they start with the belief and then they try to buttress the belief with arguments, or they realize the arguments don't work, so maybe they go to presuppositionalism, or I mean, it's just so unbelievably dishonest to me. That's why I'm really happy I don't think about any of this stuff anymore. It was a complete waste of time. Like I got into this thing, oh wow, it's going to be really deep, arguments for the existence of God, deep as it gets. No, it's a friend of mine, actually I just mentioned him to you, Matt Thornton, said to me, the guy, the Straight Blast founder, I was talking to him about, I said something about like, oh, you know, these, to use the word that you use, sophisticated arguments. And Jerry Coyne has riffed off the word sophisticated. He's the guy who wrote, he's a good friend of mine. He wrote, you know, Why Evolution is True and Faith versus Fact, etc. It's just sophisticated theology. But Matt said to me, they're really not sophisticated. They're all bullshit. They're just flimsy at core, but they just dress them up with big words and kind of, it was really an utter waste of my time to dedicate so many years to something so ridiculous. I'm starting to feel the same way actually about all that time I spent on social justice and intersectionality, a complete fucking waste of my time where I could have been doing something productive.
Were you raised at all in like a religious, you know, like a lot of people kind of were raised quite fundamentalist, and then they turn against it because of that? Was there any of that with you, do you think, or?
Zero.
No.
Zero. My dad was an agnostic, but I know he was an atheist. In fact, he admitted that to me on his deathbed. But in the time he grew up, it was really unfashionable to say that you were an atheist. You had to say that you were an agnostic.
Right.
People didn't, with few exceptions, people didn't go around saying they're atheists. My mom was a believer, I think, who was raised in the Catholic Church. I'd probably call her more of a deist with Christian value leanings. But no, I was forced to go to Armenian school, which was another complete waste of my time. But they weren't really very religious. It was more of a cultural and ethnic thing.
Right, sure. And then I was wondering, have you seen much of the kind of response from the apologetics community towards people adopting this street epistemology type of approach?
I don't pay any attention to that, and for two reasons. One reason is well, actually, the main reason is because when I started exposing the new religion, I realized that would come at a significant price to me personally, and I didn't want to taint street epistemology with that. Okay. So, and I've talked to Reed, Nice Wonder, and Anthony Magnabosco. I told them explicitly, I didn't tell them what the project was. I said, I'm moving away from street epistemology. It shouldn't be about one man anyway. That's what I told Dawkins when we did an event together. It's like, it's never good if something's about one person. It has to be about the ideas. And I didn't want a lot of atheists, you know, they're social justice advocates, intersectionality advocates. So I knew that my taking a hammer to the new religion would come at a price, and I didn't want street epistemology to be tainted with that. So I specifically stepped away, and I don't talk about it, or up until recently, do anything or associate myself with any of it, precisely because of the fear of contamination.
Yeah, sure. Because some of the responses are quite interesting, you know, where I think some Christians specifically view it as almost like a deceitful strategy to induce doubt in people rather than kind of get at truth. So you know, like some people saying things like, you know, remember, questions aren't arguments. So you know, emotional doubt isn't necessarily de facto objection to the existence of God. And I was wondering what your thoughts are to that kind of, do you see that as like an ad hoc?
Good question. Questions aren't arguments. That's true, but they don't believe on the basis of arguments. If they believe in the basis of arguments, that there could be an argument that you would give them that they would not believe. Right. But if that's not the case, then what difference does it make? So that's the first thing. The second thing is, you know, what do these people think about, I don't know, take a religion far from theirs, like, you know, out of the Abrahamic traditions, or maybe an extreme version of a religion in the Abrahamic traditions, and ask them, well, would it be a good thing if you asked people if the methods they use to come to belief in the claims about, you know, whatever it was, would it be a good thing if they started questioning that? That's, you know, it's kind of a version of the outsider test of faith with John Loftus's, but mixed in with this idea that asking somebody questions about how they come to knowledge and the methods that they use I don't see how that could be a bad thing. I think it was Harris who said, Sam Harris, no society has ever become worse off because its people became more reasonable and more rational, something like that.
Mm. So some of the kind of criticism has also centered around like like the use of confidence scales as well. And I was wondering why they're an important part of, because they come up in both books, like asking people for how confident they are in particular beliefs and so forth. What's the kind of reasoning behind that?
That's a great question. Fantastic question. So confidence scales are one of the most important things that I've come up with, and it took me really a lifetime of thinking about this stuff every day and dedicated scholarship to figure it out. So you can do multiple things with confidence, asking people their confidence. One is you can avoid and we mentioned this in how to have impossible conversations. Yes, it is. No, it isn't. I think the example we used for that in the New York Times op-ed was, this is a patriarchy. Well, okay, so on a scale from 1 to 10, if Saudi Arabia is a 9 in the patriarchy, where is the US? I think that's the example we gave in the book. If they say, well, I don't know anything about Saudi Arabia, you say, well, okay, that's fair enough. What about, the United States in the 1950s? So you can avoid a yes, no, yes it is, no it isn't. The other thing, scales are the most unbelievably versatile things you can use. So you can figure out what your next series of questions is based upon what number one assigns oneself in the belief scale. You can also do things like chapter 6, like reverse ultracasting, or you can get a guided tour through someone's epistemology, or you can just figure out what so the myth is that beliefs are binary, right? It's not like I'm all in or I'm nothing. Is there microbial life in Europa? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I have my own suspicion, but if you ask someone, they would say probably not, but not zero, right? So beliefs are not all or nothing. But when you add scales into the mix, you can figure out if it's closer to the all or if it's closer to the nothing. And that makes those conversations far more fruitful and enjoyable, because it's a possibility to avoid confusion, if nothing else.
Yeah. And I was wondering, additionally, why the kind of focus on epistemology in the dialogue, rather than, getting into the 5 ways of Thomas Aquinas and whether or not they're, why focus on the how someone knows that?
Because if the methods, I'm just going to interrupt myself. I see a woman as I'm walking here going through recycling bins and grabbing people's cans.
Oh, wow.
Which seems like a horrifically dangerous thing to do, given a global pandemic. So that would be a great example right there of why epistemology matters, right? So your epistemology should always come before your metaphysics. So how you arrive at what it is that you think you know needs to be, I don't like the word interrogated, it's been co-opted by postmodernists, but it needs to be front and center of your belief life. And so before you figure out, in Socrates' question, what kind of life ought I to lead, or what should I do, you have to figure out, how do I differentiate a good answer from a bad answer? How do I know, what method am I using to make that determination? And if you don't have it, well, then it doesn't make any difference what any arguments are, because you don't have a robust, rigorous way to know if the arguments that you're entertaining are any good. Like, what if somebody offers their epistemology as, I talked about this in chapter 6 in the throwaway line, it's what my cat told me. Okay, so even if the conclusion, you can get true conclusions, it's called accidentally true. So you can have the delusion that your cat is talking to you, but you're in reality, your cat is not talking to you. So you need to figure out if the method that you're using to knowledge, in this case, your cat talking to you, you can rely upon that to yield the truth. And the answer is no. So it doesn't make a difference what you think the cat is telling you. The whole method is corrupt.
So when you're having these kind of difficult conversations with people, In what circumstances would you not engage in a discussion with someone, or when would you decide, this isn't going to be profitable?
Different people have different answers to that question. My answer to that question at this point is solely time.
Okay.
What is that common and opportunity cost for? What could I be doing? And since I'm doing literally nothing at any point in my day now, I'd be far more likely to see those conversations through, unless I thought there was a possibility of physical violence. But as I'm not physically interacting with anybody, then that possibility doesn't exist. So right now, in my context, I'm much more likely to have those conversations than if I were working full time again and busy. So it just depends on what you got going on and what you value.
So I wanted to ask as well about your more recent work being perhaps more centered on the strange kind of toxic political dialogue that's going on, and also centered towards a bit of the way that academia is kind of structured, maybe a left-leaning
Right.
bias in certain fields. And I wondered what your thoughts were on, there's people who have become popular through kind of opposing that kind of thing, people like Jordan Peterson, for example. However,
Right.
It seems like people going down that kind of avenue of opposing it are also becoming more religious, perhaps more likely to go into like religious fundamentalism through that kind of opposition or polarization against the left. And what are your thoughts surrounding people going down that avenue, and how does what you're doing differ from that?
Yeah, that's a very complicated question. I've never seen Peterson as somebody who's going down that fundamentalist avenue. I mean, that whole first podcast that he had with Harris, I truly still cannot get over what, like, this kind of pragmatic notion of truth, etc.
Yeah,
That is very highly unorthodox, if you want to apply the word fundamentalist to that. But
yeah,
so then you have, so I mean, look, this is a strange time, and I've published a few pieces about this, how there's been a splintering of beliefs, and I call it the great realignment. Things are happening, and my recent stuff attacking quote unquote social justice and doing the hoax papers, et cetera, that was just to expose another type of insanity that has affected the academy and eroded trust and confidence in our public institutions. And so I have no, a priori axe to grind against any of this stuff, but I just don't think that it's, well, now I can take out the but. I don't think that it's robust, the methods that they use, and it's rigorous. I think it's agenda driven and either completely or almost completely divorced from reality. And so if you chop off the head of the Hydra and another head pops up with another kind of lunacy, I'd be going after that as well.
right.
I'd have to be familiar with it. Trump has his own brand of lunacy that I'm not qualified. I don't swim in that pond, so yeah. I'm not qualified to engage. I don't even know. I mean, you have to write and speak to what you know about, and I just don't. I'm not a politician. I don't do that, so I don't know.
Yeah,
like that's just not my thing.
Yeah, I guess I didn't mean so much Peterson himself being like fundamentalist, but I think what you see is people in apologetic circles using what he's saying or his the way he resonates with disenfranchised young men, for example, to then kind of push the religious worldview, and that might be kind of at odds with what you're trying to do, maybe. Or
yeah, I see that, and Peter Lindbergh put some stuff about that in his white paper. I don't see those as opposing in any sense. In fact, if and I don't know how much you want to go on the specifics of Peterson, but I think a lot of that stuff of take responsibility on yourself and will yield more meaning in your life, etc. When you and looking at narratives in terms of the resurrection and stories that we can use, I certainly do see like the folks at Liberty University, and certainly not all of them, but I see a strainer. I've seen some pieces there coming out. And can you hear the wind?
Just a little bit, but it's not messing up your audio too bad. Yeah, don't worry.
Okay, good, because I can try to hide out somewhere. So I definitely see that being used, but I think that in the time that we live in, with information technologies destabilizing dominant narratives and traditional belief structures, I think that, my friend Clay Rutledge talks about, and we've mentioned, he writes about this, and we have a different belief. We talked about this on Rubin Report, this substitution hypothesis, and the idea is that people have to believe in something, and so isn't it better that they believe in less benign lunacies as opposed to more benign lunacies? Isn't it better that they're Jains as opposed to more strict interpretations of a religion I will not name?
Yeah. So the other day I spoke to a logician called Graham Priest, who you might be familiar with. And one of the questions that I asked him was to do with like critical thinking. And you also teach a critical thinking course at Portland State University, is that right?
Yeah, it's my critical thinking is really my critical thinking and the philosophy of education are my specialties.
So he was kind of saying that actually, like learning his type of formal, almost mathematical logic isn't even that useful for rigorous critical thinking. And he was suggesting, putting people under, in like stressful problem solving circumstances and things. I was wondering, what's your approach to, if people want to learn critical thinking, they want to become better reasoners, how do you go about teaching that? How do you recommend people engage with doing that?
That is an epic question. Excellent question. So first of all, Graham, that was his name. He is absolutely 100% correct. And maybe this is just a function of elements of university architecture, but those classes are segmented certain ways. So critical thinking is really its own class. So I'm going to give you a very, very unorthodox answer, but it is my honest and sincere opinion. And I'm sure a lot of people will despise it, but I believe, after throwing myself at this for decades, that this answer is, I'm warranted and justified in giving it. The best way to improve your critical thinking skills would be to download the American Philosophical Association's Delphi report from 1990, 1991, and then read what is an ideal critical thinker? Read the definition and bracket all of the skill sets: analysis, inference, explanation, bracket all that. But instead of that, that's what people teach in schools. And that's not unreasonable. In fact, the reason for that is it's very easy to grade people on, multiple choice, et cetera. But that won't really ultimately, really, truly improve someone's critical thinking. In fact, this is where the hate will come, and then from there I'll be a Nazi. That will actually make someone's epistemic situation worse, because as Michael Shermer says, my friend from, Skeptic, that will make somebody better at rationalizing. That's the reason in the believing brain why people believe weird things, that smart people believe weird things. But instead, when you look at the copy of the American Philosophical Association's Delphi report and just get the summary, it's free and available online. And no, I make no money from it at all. Look at the attitudinal dispositions. Go through those attitudinal dispositions. And then, like, a trustful of reason, willing to reconsider, there's a whole bunch of them. And notice that it's fairly easy to get the skill set. But if you have the skill set and don't have the attitude, you'll make yourself better at falling into delusion, driving yourself into delusion. So the most important thing is to develop the attitudinal dispositions necessary for rationality. You can do that. That's 8/10 of the way there.
And what do you kind of mean by those attitudinal dispositions? Sorry, just for clarification.
So let's differentiate that from a skill set. So a skill set is, I give you, statistics of, I don't know, murder rates in various counties, and then I give you dates certain gun laws are passed. I'm just making this up, but
Yeah,
you know,
sure.
dates certain gun laws are passed, and then I say, okay, make inferences. And you know, you put on your analytical cap and you start making inferences, and you're like, well, you know, this law under this correlates with this, or and try to figure out the causal. Okay, so those are all the stuff like that is the skill set. The attitude is, and the two, there are a whole bunch of them, but two I think are important. And just because I think they're important doesn't mean everybody should think they're, you know, the most important. But these are the ones that I personally think are the most important. Is a willingness to revise your beliefs.
Mm.
Are you willing to revise your beliefs? Are you trustful of reason? Are you prudent in making decisions? So you'd go through that list, and what I have people do in my class is I print that off, and I tell them, listen, this will take you 2 minutes a day. Literally, this will literally take you 2 minutes a day. Print that off. You're not going to be graded on it. Go through your day and ask yourself, start off, what did I do good? How could I improve? And focus on that with the attitudes. Was I, you know, how did I listen to what someone said? Did I explain myself very well? And then if you were to do that, you can very slowly but surely incrementally increase your ability to think critically.
Could you repeat again what the document was called? I think a few people in the chat are saying the American Philosophical Association
Delphi report, DELPHI, Delphi report from 1990, 1991. You can get it as a PDF, and just take the section out that says cut it. It's literally a paragraph, and there's some more stuff. But the main thing is, you know, the ideal critical thinker, and it's like a big, long, kind of bullshitty definition. But
right,
that's, if you get that, you can use that daily, and very, very slowly in tiny increments improve the metrics. So look, if I said to you, hey man, I'm thinking of making a, you know, I've been thinking a lot about cooking since I've been trapped in my house. I'm thinking of making a casserole tonight.
mm-hmm.
And you're like, well, okay, what are you going to do? And I'm like, I don't know, man. I'm just going to throw some shit together and hope for the best. Nobody would say that, right? You would go to Google and you put in casserole recipes, and you'd probably, if you were a little more savvy, put in best casserole or award-winning casserole recipes.
Right.
Oh, I just saw this kid bat his sister in the head. I can't go over there and help because everyone's paranoid of having the virus. Wow, that's pretty chaotic. Anyway, but so the idea is you don't just randomly put stuff in. Can you hear her cry?
Yeah, I can hear it in the background. Yeah.
She's going berserk. Anyway, I would go over there and help, but
yeah,
not in this situation. Anyway,
yeah.
So the idea is that the American Philosophical Association's Delphi report is like a recipe. Is it a perfect recipe? No, of course not. It's subject to revision, but it's the best one we have at this time. So if you want to ask yourself, how do I be a good critical thinker? Look at what the consensus of experts have to say. And you know, those have been modified and tweaked over the years, but basically it's really, really good.
So someone has asked in the chat if you always use street epistemology in your educational endeavors.
Yeah, I always, well, I don't want to say always, but I frequently use it. Sometimes I have to, when people ask me a question, I teach these really large classes, or at least I did until the physical university shut down.
Yeah.
And you know, some of those classes have 120 people, and sometimes when people raise their hand, I just have to give them a factual answer. So in those times, you're like, what about this? So I wouldn't say always, but frequently I will incorporate some aspect, even if that aspect is, I always make sure I say I don't know when I don't know something. And of course, there are a bunch of people who will be like, oh, you fucking retard. But you know, more often than not, people will say, wow, I was like, okay, if it's cool for Boghossian to say he doesn't know, that's how we all change the culture, right?
Right.
And I was only being halfway sarcastic. People have, written bile vitriol, like, oh, he said he doesn't know, he shouldn't be teaching here, like,
Really?
so,
Wow.
so you'll always get some people who will look at, James Randi used to say, once you get the former head of the James Randi Educational Foundation, once you get your PhD, you stop saying, I don't know. And it should be just the opposite. You should say it a lot, and you should say it publicly. And anybody who calls you names or belittles you or tries to humiliate you, they're just simply not worth your time. They need to emotionally grow up.
Yeah. Have you read that article that became quite popular like a month ago about a guy saying why he's leaving academic philosophy?
No, I see those all the time, but I can probably guess. Pampered students, administration that's on the warpath against anybody who's traumatized students.
Pretty much,
I
but
mean,
then he was also saying he was kind of sick of the, like the kind of pretending within that type of academia, where it's like, we're always pretending to be really sophisticated and this and that, and it just being like not about real problems or about
yes,
like real thinking, just about like weird, sophisticated words and
right.
yeah.
And Richard Dawkins calls the people in the grievance studies industry pretentious charlatans, and that's what they are. They're pretentious charlatans. These people are driving the society into an epistemic sinkhole.
Why do you think? Why would you say like an epistemic sinkhole? Is it because of the way they just accept anything that kind of it has the right words in it? Problematic, patriarchy, whatever, and it's through.
That's a symptom of the cause. The cause is promoting things like standpoint epistemology.
Right.
Your feelings are a reliable guide to the truth, and sucking off of Foucault, and everything is in a power structure and knowledge. And that's another thing I think I'm going to stop talking and thinking about. It's just utterly mentally exhausting to engage this anymore. It's just bullshit. Nobody believes that. I think I just said on that podcast I was on, nobody thinks their feelings are a reliable guide to the truth when it comes to the fucking coronavirus, do they? No. So why would it be a reliable guide to the truth to anything else? It's only a reliable guide to your subjectivity. Like when you call the pizza place, what do you order on your pizza? It's not a reliable guide when it comes to like, anything that's objective, data driven. But I'm just tired of nonsense. I just am tired of it. So I think I'm really enjoying this break, doing some cooking. All I have to do is not get sick and I'll be fine.
I do think though that is where like thinking about how to approach these difficult conversations is really useful. So like, for example, I'm a software engineer and there's the constant big push, for women in tech at events and things. And maybe there has been some bias in some places, but the way it is now is literally, it's literally just companies saying we can use this thing to appear virtuous. And like there's all sorts of unfair pay bonuses, promotions into positions and things. And it's very, very difficult to say, to say, well, actually, like this is unfair, or like what can I do to get those same opportunities? Do I work harder? Do I work more hours? Do I get more qualifications?
Right. So you have to understand some of the drivers behind that. So this is another conversation entirely, and it's very difficult to wrap your head around this. You have to start with certain assumptions. So these people start with certain assumptions. There's inherent systematic discrimination against women, minorities, gays, trans people. There's a hierarchy of discrimination in which some of those individuals, an intersectional hierarchy, are discriminated against more. For example, if you're women and Black, you're discriminated against more than if you're a woman who's white. And then you have to understand that the only explanatory power they have is looking at the system that they've already concluded on the basis of zero evidence is systematically biased against certain groups of people. In this, your example, women. And so how do you remediate those injustices? And then on top of that, they don't even have to smuggle it in anymore. They don't even have a neologism. They don't even like make up words. They just change the meanings of ordinary words. And then they I don't know what the word dissolve, or I don't know what the word would be. They masquerade, or that's not the word either, but like equity. So we know that we have to have raises for women, et cetera, in the tech industry, because we have to overcome these traditional injustices when the system was biased against women. So, you know, you're operating under a different moral system and a moral paradigm when you deal with these folks. Mm. Oh, and then well, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it can become very difficult, though, I think, because then it's not just the individual that you're talking to that you're necessarily engaging with. You know, you've got to think about, well, if I say this to a manager, well, he's scared of what his peers are going to think of him,
right?
Or how HR rates him, or how am I going to be viewed now by the structure if I speak out in this way?
Right, and that's because they use the word sexist, racist, bigot, homophobe, all that stuff. So that's the battering ram to keep people in line, to prevent them from asking questions, etc. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Sorry. So someone's just asked in the chat, I think something you were saying, what a neologism is, and I don't think I know that word either, actually. So.
Oh, it's like two words that are stuck together. Like restaurant is a neologism that takes breast and restaurant. Like Hooters is a restaurant. It's a combining the word breast and restaurant.
Okay, awesome. So then, what do you think are the biggest mistake new SEers make that makes their practice potentially like not work or maybe be harmful in some way?
I don't know, because I don't really watch a lot of that stuff. But as a general rule, without having gone into specifics, I would say an unwillingness to revise their own beliefs.
Right.
And specifically unwillingness to adopt a method to come to knowledge that other people use, that if it is reliable, they ought to use it themselves.
Interestingly, so this is something someone's asked is about, is there a way out of Agrippa's trilemma? How do you, is there a way out of like an endlessly asking, how do you know that? And I suppose like, you know, like with the street epistemology thing, which is like a framework for figuring out almost how someone else came to the conclusions they did, is there like a positive side?
Yeah, there is.
Yeah.
Multiple positive sides. It has positive epistemological ambitions as well. One of those would be, how would we know we got a correct answer? What would a correct answer look like? How would that be judged?
Is that a question for me? Sorry, I don't.
No, that's what I would
just
say to
in
somebody.
general. Okay.
Yeah, as a way out of the dilemma. So then you could see what they say and then take it from there. Depends what they say, right?
Yeah. I guess though, would you not get like varying, you know, you're gonna get varying views on that sort of thing? So you're saying it's like contextually dependent?
Yeah, well, that's the thing about SE. You have to be nimble, right? Because you don't really know what anybody's going to say to you at any point, and you don't even know if in chapter 7 of How to Have Impossible Conversations, we talk about things that seem like they ought to be rooted in epistemology or not. And that's a huge lesson I've learned over the years. These are just moral beliefs that masquerade as epistemological beliefs. So someone will have a belief about, I don't know, illegal aliens or whatever. Although even talking about that seems so like 2 months ago. And the reason that they'll hold that belief is because they will think, well, I'm a good person, good people hold this belief, therefore I hold, whatever it is. I'm a patriotic American. Patriotic Americans believe this, therefore I believe this.
So
something like that. That's the general idea.
Do you think people can like choose what they believe, and how does that kind of influence your approach towards these things?
Yeah, That is an excellent, excellent, excellent question. That's called doxastic volunteerism in the literature. It's a very niche, extremely esoteric topic or subject within epistemology. I believe that's the case. There have been some people far smarter than I who do not, and some of those people I've had intense discussions about that. But I do. I believe in the Enlightenment ideals. I believe that people can use reason to live better lives. I believe, as Aristotle said, that people want to believe and know it's true. And I believe there are better and worse ways to come to knowledge. I believe that the Elenchus and the Socratic method is perhaps the best at its score as a skeleton, perhaps the best. But in 2,400 some odd years, we've learned a lot more, so we can add flesh to that skeleton to really use that. So there's no question. I think that people can choose their beliefs, and that lends itself to a kind of a complicated situation, because people can always go back to the free will arguments, or I think we could talk about that, but that will lead us down a rabbit hole.
Okay, yeah, sure. I completely understand.
I'm not averse to talking about it if you want.
No, I know. It's just you could spend another hour talking about, whether you're a compatibilist or whatever. And
right.
So what would you say is like the main difference then between like the Socratic method and street epistemology? Some people have kind of said, well, as SE, it's just the Socratic method basically. Would you see it as a different thing, or would you be happy to have it described that way?
It takes the Socratic method as a skeleton, what's the word I want to use? When the bones of the skeleton are clear and defined, like a perfectly preserved
scaffold.
skeleton. Yeah, right. and it adds to that. Yeah, it adds to that, and it enhances it. And because there's some great dialogues. The Meno and the Republic and the Symposium. There's just some great dialogues in which you see that. But after you've been doing street epistemology for a while, and you've really read the Manual for Creating Atheists, and you've read some of not just the stuff that I've done, but you see that there's a lot of room. We know stuff now from behavioral sciences, from cult exiting, from hostage negotiations, from philosophy, from applied epistemology. We know stuff now that simply did not exist in the world 2,400 years ago. And so when you take what we now know and you add it to something that, in my personal opinion, not only do I believe that the Socratic method is timeless, I also believe that it transcends species, and I believe that it transcends linguistic communities. I believe that the essence of the Elenchus is something that, if there were intelligent, rational beings out there, they would use that as a core for the method of their communicative interactions.
That's interesting. Is that like because there's a whole sort of set of things that come along with that, like thinking that like among atheists, a lot of them adopt a lot of them that I've talked to adopt these positions of kind of like having no underlying kind of ontology to, like, there aren't any facts, like strong anti-realism about those sort of things. But you're saying that like any rational beings would be thinking in the same way. There are these underlying like logic and reasoning to reality in some sense.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'll let that comment stand and so on. Maybe I'll come back, or if you have anything in the chat, I'll answer specific. But if you maybe have me back in a year or two, and I'll unpack. But I think that there is something very, very, very profound there, and I think it's very profound because it's true.
So perhaps there's a last question from the chat that's maybe a bit more light-hearted. Would be, can I ask if you're a vegan, and if not, what would it take to lower your confidence in the claim eating meat is in line with my values?
Oh, that's a different question than being a vegetarian, being a vegan. So I don't know how they want me to interpret that question. But up until very, very recently, I was a very good vegetarian. I would only eat, I would very rarely eat meat, but when I did, it would be no factory. I have an absolute rule of no factory farmed meat. I have, during the pandemic, there was kind of buying, and it was, I guess that context changed for me, but I'd been a non-factory farm meat eater. Now, what would it take for me to be a vegan? It's a lot, because like, what do you do about the people who kill cows to eat, and then you use the leather? Like, would that go to waste, or would the people who, I don't know, I guess I'd have to engage somebody substantively about that. But there's no question that animals suffer, they feel pain. I think pigs in particular have kind of a self-consciousness that cows don't. I think that we now know things that makes it, I don't tell people how to live, but seems to me like it's bordering on a ethical imperative to be some strain of vegetarian.
Awesome. Well, I guess that there's a few more questions in the chat, but I don't want to keep you on much longer, so I'm happy to kind of wrap up around there. You've been walking for about an hour now at least, so.
That's good. I got in my steps, so I will tell you as a courtesy to myself, if I may take a moment of your time, how many steps I have walked. 17,799 steps today. So it was a successful. If I can do one podcast a day while walking around this, I can get in a good number of steps. So you've helped me.
And then you'll not have gained like 20 kilos or whatever that is in stone by the time.
Yes, that is absolutely my goal, to not, because I was feeling actually pretty good about my jits game, and I was going to the gym every day. I was feeling good about that. I was eating right. Now I'm eating bread. I had a sandwich today with bread. I'm gonna have tortilla tonight. So, and my daughter's making these fucking pies all the time. That's putting me under. So, yeah. Anyway.
But you'll come back, and your top game will be much stronger, and everyone will be saying.
I hope so. I'm ready. I'm ready to go back. I don't know how I'm going to make it all these months without doing any jiu-jitsu. It's already killing me. Do
people give you that the sort of backhanded compliment, that you're very strong role?
They say, people have said to me in a joking way, like, not bad for an old man. And I had my own class, which I was really loving, and it was a technical role. In fact, I just talked to Matt again, that Gunnar Nelson, the Icelandic jiu-jitsu prodigy, told him that his slow technical rolling improved his jiu-jitsu more than anything else. So I took that, and I had my own class, and then a global pandemic hit, and it interrupted my ideological war that I was waging. It interrupted my jiu-jitsu game. Now I just sit around, and I don't even know what I watch. A lot of TV, which is actually wonderful. I'm a huge fan of watching TV. So this is so far, it's been pretty good for me.
Well, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. And I guess maybe I'll send you an email in the future sometime, and we can see if you have another book coming out or some other crazy thing happens. We can talk about that. Cool. All right, man. Well, I appreciate the chat very much so, and I hope you have a great night. You too. Or day, wherever it is over there. Yeah, it's nighttime now, but I'm just gonna go to bed after this. So, yeah, cheers. Perfect. All right. Thanks a lot, man. Later. Bye.